Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, and welcome back to our Bible study series going through the book of Romans. If you have a Bible, please open it up to Romans and turn to chapter 11 of Romans. We are almost done with Romans, guys. We've only got a few more chapters to go, and today we're going into 11. I'll go ahead and warn you right now, 11 is going to feel a little dry. 11 has to deal with Paul's concern for Israel and the remnant of Israel, and some of you may even look at this and say, you know what, Raven, I'm not sure how this applies to us, but don't worry, we are going to talk about it. We're going to go into it in as in-depth as we possibly can in a short amount of time. I thank you all for bearing with me as we get through this. This has been a very long but very fun series, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. If you are new to this series, welcome. I'm glad you could come. I hope you'll stick around and listen to the full thing, and I also hope that you'll take the time to go and check out the full series itself. I've got a playlist where you can see where we started in Romans. We kind of did an introductory to Paul's journey into the book of Romans and how he wrote his letter, and we've gone through chapters 1 all the way up to now in 11. There are 16 chapters total, so we've only got 5 more to go after this. Man, it just feels so much fun. I have really been enjoying this, and again, I hope you have too. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into chapter 11. For those of you who don't remember what we talked about last time, in chapter 10, Paul is talking to the Jews and the Gentiles about salvation coming to them, and if you'll remember, Paul was very concerned about the Israelites and the Jews. He was very concerned because he was saying, hey, you know, you Jews, you're the ones who God gave the law to. You're the ones who God reached out to first, and yet you've rejected Jesus in a big way. You keep turning away from Jesus. And we see this in prophecy. We see this with Isaiah, who said that many of you will reject me. Many of you will reject the message of God for the law, and you have no idea how bad that is for you. He even says very clearly, if I could lay down my own life or separate myself from God, knowing it would bring you all to God, then hey, I would do it. And that's a great act of love from Paul. Well, we're going into chapter 11 now, where Paul is going to wrap up his talk on the Jews specifically. So let's get started. Reading into verse 1 through 6. I ask then, did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people, whom he foreknew. Don't you know that Scripture says in the passage about Elijah how he appealed to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets and torn down your altars. I'm the only one left, and they are trying to kill me. And what was God's answer to him? I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too at the present time there is a remnant chosen by grace. And if by grace, then it cannot be based on works. If it were grace, would no longer be grace. Okay, so let's break that down. That's a lot. We went through verses 1 through 6. That was a lot to get through, but it all serves a point. All of this is to talk about one point. So what is Paul saying literally here? He's answering a question. Earlier in chapter 10, he was talking about how so many Israelites rejected God. So the next question is, does that mean that God has rejected his people fully? No, it has not. I mean, after all, Paul himself is an Israelite. He's a Jew. He was born of the tribe of Benjamin. He's saying, I'm still here. I'm still a Jew, and I've still accepted it. God hasn't rejected us. And then what he does after that is he makes a comparison. He goes back to Elijah in 1 Kings 17, where Elijah is saying, God, I'm the last faithful Jew there is. Everyone else in Israel wants me dead, because Elijah was a prophet at a time when the Israelites didn't like prophets anymore. Much of Israel had turned against God, had rejected God, and Elijah was on his own, on the run, and he was basically saying, God, the people of Israel, your people, have rejected you and rejected me, and they're trying to kill me. But God replies, there are 7,000 who I've reserved who have not bowed the knee to Baal, who was a god that the Israelites had adopted and were worshiping. And he's saying, and it's just like that now. Even though it feels like so many of the Israelites have rejected God, there are still many that God has set aside who will be saved, who will accept. And so what does this have to do with us? There are 3 things that this has to do with us. Number 1, God has made it clear that, you can start each one with this. God has made it clear that, 1, not all of the Jews are rejected. Now, I've heard some people, some Christians in this day and age say that the Jews are a rejected people. That God gave the message to the Jews at first, but they rejected God, so now it's for the Gentiles. This is not true. It is for everyone. God has not rejected the Jews. They still have an opportunity. Number 2, God has made it clear that Elijah faced a similar problem. This is nothing new. This is nothing new under the sun, okay? God knows about the rejection, the pattern of rejection of his people. Think about this. When you go through the Old Testament, particularly in the book of Exodus and Judges, you see constantly how the people of God come to him and they worship him and they love him, then fall away, then something bad happens and they come back again, and then they fall away again, and then they come back again. It is a constant cycle. They do it all the time. This is nothing new to God. This is absolutely nothing new. So if anyone's saying, oh, this is so terrible, look at all the rejection against God right now, this is so awful, nothing new. This is absolutely nothing new. And number 3, God has made it clear that works cannot save. God's grace is sufficient. So, in fact, I want to point to this part in verse 6. And if by grace, then it cannot be based on works. If it were, grace would no longer be grace. We've talked about this previously in our Romans discussion, but I do want to make it clear again. You cannot be saved by works. The Jews at the time believed that it is abiding in the law that allows you to be saved. You have to live according to the law. You have to follow Jewish law by the book without question 100%. And Paul is saying, no, it is by grace that we're saved. If you could be saved by your own works, by being a good enough person, by following the law in just the right ways, then grace would not mean anything. There would be no need for grace. Grace would not be grace. That's what he's saying here. So all of these things fall into a single point. And you might be thinking, again, Raven, what does this have to do with us? Let me be clear. One thing that terrifies many Christians today, I've seen a lot of Christian YouTube videos and a lot of Christian sermons and talks and Bible studies where people say, look at how much this world has fallen. Truly, we live in very dark times. These are awful times, the kind of time we've never seen before in Christian history. And here I look at this and I say, no, we've seen this before. This is nothing new. God has not rejected us. Because I've heard Christians say that God has rejected this world. No, God has not rejected anybody. He is still loving. He's still trying to reach everyone. Number 2, that this is something we've faced before, with Elijah being a really good example. Elijah's faced this before. Moses faced this before. A lot of different people in the Bible have faced this. And then finally, being good enough is not enough to save you. You cannot be saved by your own works. You are chosen by God to be saved. God has already chosen you. God has meant a good thing in you. Okay? All right. So wanted to get that out of the way. Let's move on to the next part. Verse 7. What then? What the people of Israel sought so earnestly, they did not obtain. The elect among them did, but the others were hardened. Okay. This is something that a lot of people bring up, and I hear this argument a whole lot when discussing what God does. Let's read that again. What then? What the people of Israel sought so earnestly, they did not obtain. The elect among them did, but the others were hardened. People talk about the idea of hardening hearts. Like, think of Pharaoh in Egypt. Why did God harden his heart? Isn't that unfair? You're basically making it so that there's no possible way Pharaoh would ever accept God. So why did God, in fact, you know what? Let's read a little further. I want to read into verse 8. As it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that could not see, and ears that could not hear to this very day. Now, why did God do that? Why did God give certain people a spirit of stupor, eyes that could not see, and ears that could not hear to this very day? I'll explain why. Here's why. It's not because God is just saying, you know what, I don't want to save you, so I'm going to make it so that you'll never find me. That's not the reason. Let me tell you about something God does. When you have people who say, I want nothing to do with God, I want nothing to do with the Lord, I want nothing to do with his message or his people or his will or his plan, I don't want anything to do with it, it is not for me, I don't care for it, eventually God is going to say, okay, then I will have nothing to do with you. But here's the problem. I'm everywhere. God is omnipotent. God is omniscient. God is omnipresent. He is in all places. His message, his will, his power, his miracles are everywhere. So it's very hard for God to separate himself from you when he's already everywhere. So what does he do? Well, he makes it so that you don't get to see him. He hardens your heart. He blinds your eyes. He covers your ears. And eventually you have people who are constantly exposed to God who just will not or cannot understand the message. That's why he says God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that could not see and ears that could not hear to this very day. If you want God to leave you alone, he will do that. And he's going to shut the door. So you don't get to complain, therefore, when you say, I can't tell what's going on outside. Well, you wanted God to keep you out. See, that's the thing. People like to say, well, if God hardens people's hearts, then he's making it impossible for everyone to reach him. Let me ask, those people whose hearts he hardened, did they want God in the first place? Were they actually interested in God? Did they really want it? Let's read a little further. Let's go into verse 9. And David says, may their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block and a retribution for them. May their eyes be darkened so they cannot see, and their backs be bent over. More evidence to what I was just saying. Here's the reality. If you want God to leave you alone, if you want God out of your life, God's going to grant you that wish. But that just means that he's going to harden your heart so that when you do see God's works, well, you're not going to recognize it, or you're going to make excuses to push it away. See, that's the thing. I once asked my pastor, how do we know that there is a God? Like, how do we know? And he said, we Christians, when we have the Holy Spirit working in us, we see God in everything. In the birth of a baby, in a spring day, in the wind in the mountains, in the rising and falling of the tides. It's kind of like what C.S. Lewis famously said, I do not believe that the sun will rise. Like, I believe in Jesus the same way I believe in the sun, not because I see it, but because through it I see everything. It's the same thing here. We can see God through everything. We know God exists because through him we see everything. So if a person says, I don't want anything to do with God, and I don't want to listen to God, I don't want to care about God, I don't care what he has to say, well, then God's going to shut you off from his creation. He's going to say, all right, well, then any time that you might be able to see me, well, you don't want to see me, so you're not going to recognize it. And good examples of these are atheists like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. These are very intellectual, very intelligent men, gifted minds. But they made it clear very early on, we want nothing to do with God. We want nothing to do with his message. We don't care about it. We don't want to listen to it. In fact, we want to dedicate ourselves to trying to disprove God or trying to mock people who believe in him. So now, even though they come before Christian apologists constantly, who many times will bring different and very unique evidence for God, they will dismiss it or they will dodge it. In fact, famously, Richard Dawkins, I believe it was asked in an interview, what could God do if he was real to convince you that he was real? And he said famously, there's nothing God could do, because anything he did, I would probably assume was something else. If God wrote in the stars, hey, I'm God, believe in me, I'd probably assume it was just aliens messing with me. If God appeared in physical form right in front of me and said, hey, I'm God, worship me, I'd probably just assume I was hallucinating.
What would it take for you to believe in God?
Well, I used to say it would be very simple. It would be, the second coming of Jesus or a great, big, deep, booming bass Paul Robeson voice saying, I am God and I created. But I was persuaded mostly by actually Steve Zara, who's a regular contributor to my website, richarddawkins.net. He more or less persuaded me that even if there was this booming voice and the second coming in clouds of glory, the more probable explanation is that it's a hallucination or a conjuring trick by David Copperfield or something. He made the point that a supernatural explanation for anything is incoherent, that it just doesn't it doesn't add up to an explanation for anything.
So what would persuade you?
Well, I'm starting to think nothing would, which in a way goes against the grain, because I've always paid lip service to the view that a scientist should change his mind when evidence is forthcoming. The trouble is, I can't think what that evidence would look like.
See what I mean? It's not a matter of... they chose not to believe. They chose everything but God, so God said, okay. Now your heart is hardened, your eyes are blind, and your ears are deaf to everything I have to tell you. And the Bible tells us how to deal with those. Matthew 7:5, cast not pearls before swine. There are some people it is not worth giving that which is holy or that which is treasurable. And some of you might say, that's really mean. It's just God giving them what they want. It's just God giving them what they want. If you tell God, you know what, I'm too smart to believe in you. I'm too intellectual to believe in you. I'm just above that nonsense. Well, God's response is, all right. See you around. I won't have anything to do with you, and you won't have anything to do with me. and I will make sure it stays that way. So don't be mad and say, well, if God really loved me, he'd try to make it. He's just giving you what you want. You know what I mean? But we've gone on to that long enough. Let's keep going. We got more to go. We got a lot more to go. Verse 11. Again I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Not at all. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. But if their transgression means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their full inclusion bring? So what is this? This is interesting. Paul wants one thing. Here's what he wants. He wants unification of the church. He wants the Jews and the Gentiles to come together in one church. And that's what he's talking about here. Again, I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? No. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious, to make them jealous. So in other words, here's the thing, Israel. You've messed up. You decided to follow the law instead of God himself. The consequence is that God has now offered his salvation to not just you, but to the Gentiles. And now you're jealous. You're angry that God would extend his mercy to the Gentiles. Well, what's the response to that, Jews? What's the response to that, Israel? Maybe you need to come back. Because that's what he follows up with. But if their transgressions mean riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their full inclusion bring? So if your transgression, if you leaving God, brought the Gentiles into God's mercy, how awesome do you think it'll be when you come back? When you join up with your brothers and sisters among the Gentiles? Do you not realize how amazing that's going to be? Let's look at this another way. Do you want to know one of the things I see a whole lot in comment sections and in talks about denominations of the church? I get asked a lot about my denomination or what denominations I approve of. The Catholic Church is one that gets brought up a lot. I've heard lots of people say Catholics aren't real Christians. They're not real Christians. They're way too legalistic. They do weird rituals and stuff like that. And you know what? I'll agree. They do some weird stuff, and there's some things about the Catholic Church that I don't fully approve of. But let me put it this way. What if we looked at the Catholic Church like we're looking at the Jews in this? They've fallen away. They've made mistakes. There are aspects of the Catholic Church that are not in line with God. But does that mean we reject them outright? Not at all. Because imagine how amazing it will be when we include them back into the fold. If we can convince the Catholics to recognize the problems with their legalistic and ritualistic practices, wouldn't it be amazing if we could get them back into the fold? Because let's face it, the Catholic Church was around before the Protestant Church. The Protestant Church came out of the Catholic Church, so something good was in the Catholic Church at one time. There had to be something within the Catholic Church that was still reasonable with God. The Protestants just broke away from it because they had a difference of opinion about how we should be worshiping God. But imagine when we can reunify. Imagine we can bring the Catholics back into that. Or imagine what would happen if we brought some of the Protestants who are practicing weird practices back in. Because let's face it, there are some Protestant denominations that do weird stuff. Instead of rejecting them and saying, you're just not Christian, I don't want anything to do with you, you're just stupid, you're just wrong, and I'm talking to Catholics and Protestants right now. Instead of rejecting each other, what if we tried to reunify, try to help each other? You know? Just a thought. Let's keep going. I am talking to you Gentiles. Watch this, okay? Talking to the Gentiles now. Inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I take pride in my ministry, in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. For if their rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? Again, he's talking about the same thing he was earlier. He's saying so he was talking to the Gentiles first, he was talking to the Jews first. Now he's talking to the Gentiles and saying, Gentiles, I am proud of my ministry to you. I'm glad to be talking to you too. Because that was what happened to Paul. He tried speaking to the Jews first, but he got rejected and shouted at and attacked so many times. He said, you know what? I'm now only going to the Gentiles. So now he's saying, Gentiles, listen to me. Don't get full of yourself. I speak to you hoping that it will save your souls, and through saving your souls, it will wake up my brothers and sisters of the Jews. Because if their rejection opened up salvation to you, imagine what would happen when they come back to the faith. Let's go to verse 16. If the part of the dough offered at first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. He's using an analogy of trees. He's basically saying if the Jews, who were the original keepers of God's promise, are the tree, or they're the first fruits, right? They're the dough offered as the first fruits. Then that means that the branches are holy as well. The roots are holy, therefore the branches are holy. You are the branches that come off that first promise. Let's go into verse 17 because he's going to go further into the analogy. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this: you do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted. But they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but tremble, for if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Okay, so Paul is speaking very clearly to the Gentiles here. He says, Paul is warning not to feel superior because God rejected some Jews. Think of it like an olive tree. Think of it like a tree, right? The roots are God's salvation, right? They're this message of salvation. Originally, salvation was offered to the Jews. They were like the branches of the tree. Some of the branches have been stripped off because they've rejected God. They've run away from God. They no longer want anything to do with God. So those branches have been plucked off the tree. Now there are some branches from other wild trees, the Gentiles, who have been grafted on to the tree. They've been grafted on and applied to this tree where the broken branches used to be. And Paul is saying, you've been applied. You've been added. But don't feel superior, because if God broke off the branches that rejected him, he will break you off too if you reject him. Don't get cocky. That's what it comes down to. As Jews and Gentiles, you must share the tree's nourishment based on faith. You cannot rest on the idea of your culture or heritage. It is all based on the roots of that tree, which are the message of salvation. So he's saying to the Gentiles, even though I'm talking to the Jews right now and telling them that what they're doing is wrong, don't become like them. It's a warning, okay? Okay, let's keep going. Verse 22. Consider therefore the kindness and sternness of God, sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. See, I told you, he was saying, you'll get cut off if you're not careful. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you were cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature, more grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? So again, he's still using the analogy. He's saying that the Gentiles are like from wild olive trees, but they were still grafted into nurtured and cared for and controlled cultivated olive trees. And you were able to be grafted in. Imagine what happens when we regraft in the original branches. It's a good analogy. All right. Moving on to verse 25. I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, he will turn godlessness away from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So, what does that mean? Well, to understand what it means, essentially, Paul is saying, don't be conceited. Right now you're suffering from a hardness of the heart, but it will not last. Some of you will return. You will return, and he's using a prophecy to add to it. The deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Verse 28. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake, but as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. Just as you who were at the one time disobedient to God have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience, so they too have now become disobedient in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. For God has bound everyone over to disobedience so that he may have mercy on them all. So in this passage, Paul shows how the Jews and the Gentiles benefit each other. Because that's the thing. That's what's going on in Rome at this point in time. The Jews and the Gentiles are having a huge spat about salvation. The Jews are saying that you need to be like the Jews to be saved, or the Gentiles are saying, no, you don't need to be like the Jews. You can live however you like to, as long as you accept Jesus Christ. And Paul is saying, you two need to stop squabbling. Let's talk about this. What he's saying is, whenever God shows mercy to one group, the other shares in the blessing. In God's original plan, the Jews would be the source of God's blessing to the Gentiles. In Genesis 12:3, God tells Abraham, I believe it's 12:3, God tells Abraham that I will bless the nations through you. That's the nations, not just the Jewish nation, the nations. When the Jews neglected this mission, God blessed the Gentiles anyway through the Jewish Messiah, Jesus. He has still maintained his love for the Jews because of his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs that are mentioned. The privileges and invitation of God given to Israel will never be withdrawn. But someday the faithful Jews will share in God's mercy. God's plans will not be thwarted. He will have mercy on them all. For a beautiful picture of Jews and Gentiles experience rich blessings, and you can look more about that in Isaiah 60. And we wrap things up here with a doxology. Verse 33. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. Amen. What does this doxology mean? A doxology is essentially a prayer of praise for God and about his wisdom for his plans. In fact, the famous doxology is one that we used to sing all the time in church. Not this one, a very different one, and sometime I'll share it with you, but let's stay focused for now. Now, these questions that are being asked in verse 34, who has known the mind of our Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay them? The implication of these questions is that no one has fully understood the mind of the Lord. No one has been his counselor. God owes nothing to anyone. Isaiah and Jeremiah ask similar questions to show that we are unable to give advice to God or criticize his ways. You can see that in Isaiah 40 and Jeremiah 23. God alone is the possessor of absolute power and absolute wisdom. In the final analysis, all of us are absolutely dependent on God. At the end of the day, we need God. He is the source of all things, including ourselves. He is the power that sustains and rules the world that we live in. And God works out all things to bring glory to himself. The all-powerful God deserves our praise. And that's something to keep in mind. God is deserving of our praise. We will never be able to fully understand God. But the fact is, we don't need to understand God fully to understand that he loves us. Now, like I said, that was a heavy chapter, but we wrapped it up. We're all done with chapter 11 now, but here's what I want you to take away from it. While this did probably feel like a drier chapter than most, I'm glad that you stuck with it. Essentially what it's trying to remind us is, guys, those of you who are Christian in my audience, don't be conceited. Don't feel superior or better than the non-believers or the Catholics or the Jews or whoever just because you understand God and are open to God and they're not. Be aware. Don't be conceited. God has saved you by faith. And if he struck off those branches of people who decided to reject him, don't think that it can't happen to you if you decide to reject him. You know what I'm saying? Secondly, the other thing I want you to take from this, don't look to God and demand an explanation why some people have a hardening of the heart and some don't. God chooses who will be saved based on who has a heart for him. If someone says, I don't want anything to do with God, I want to reject God, I want to leave God behind, I don't want anything to do with it, well, God is going to grant that wish. And it is not our place to argue. God owes us no explanation for that. For God's will, his ways, his plans are far greater than anything we can fathom. I know that doesn't make sense, and to some of us it may sound unfair. But as Paul said, who are we to question the Almighty, who knows all things and made us? That's the purpose of that doxology at the very end. Next time we'll go into chapter 12, which I'm so excited about. The last chapters of Romans 12 through 16 are very cool. They are very fun to study, and I think we'll have a good time going through them. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please, if you are new, go check out the previous entries and discussions on Romans. I think you'll find them very enlightening. And thank you guys again so much for watching. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.